want to play better golf? Of course you do. Well, here are 3 easy ways to do it. 1. Open your smartphone and look for the podcast app. 2. Open the podcast app and search Breaking Par with Bernard Sheridan. 3. Subscribe and never miss an episode of great golf instructor interviews from around the world. A new guest every week, like David Ledbetter, Brian Manzella, Dr. Sashow McKenzie, James Siegman, just to name a few. Hear their insight as they deliver their wisdom of the game. Take control of your game. Subscribe today. Your game will thank you for it.
Welcome to Breaking Par with Bernard Sheridan, the golf instruction podcast that helps you take control of your game. Now, here's your host, the founder of Par Breakers Golf Academy and certified Golf Channel Swing Fix instructor, Bernard Sheridan.
Bernie, welcome to Breaking Par. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
Well, thanks, Bernard. It's a pleasure to see you and be asked to be on your podcast. What would you like to talk about today?
Well, a couple different things. First, I'd like to congratulate you on becoming a top 100 instructor. That's a big honor, and I know that being recognized by your peers is it's a good thing to have.
Well, it's an incredible honor. It's a lot of hard work and a bit of luck, but anytime you get recognized by your peers, it's really special. And Golf Magazine's top 100 list is a list that really gets into a lot of, we'll say, scrutiny on how you teach, what you teach, and it's got to complement the magazine. So to be on that list is a tremendous honor.
So since that's happened to you, Bern, how has your life changed, do you think? Has it changed a lot? Is there a lot of different things that is taking up your time since that happened? Or are you pretty much going about your normal everyday affairs that you have been and just throwing a few things in for what you have to do for what they're requesting for you?
Well, to answer your question, it's fairly new in that we were announced at the PGA show in 2015 in conjunction with the Teaching and Coaching Summit, where I was fortunate enough to be asked to present there. And I think to answer this question will be a lot easier in 6 to 8 months because our season's just getting underway. Not that I don't teach in the off season, but I was just featured in the magazine, and I think in time, what that will do is it will create more opportunities to do publications and or videos. But for the most part, I keep doing what I've been doing the last 25 years, teaching golf.
So, and what are the bulk of students that you're working with down there, Bern? And you're in, what club are you at, too? So all our listeners know where they can, know that the area, should I say, that you're in.
Okay, I'm the Director of Instruction at Caves Valley Golf Club. It's in Owings Mills, Maryland. It's about 25, 30 minutes outside the city of Baltimore, and I've been there. This is my 4th season. And prior to that, I was at Woodhome Country Club, which is about 15 minutes from where I work now, and I was there for just about 17 years. And Baltimore's been a great market for me. I work with a lot of different players. I would say any range from beginner to somebody trying to get their tour card. I'm blessed with a diverse group of students. I do work with a lot of competitive juniors, some college players, a few mini tour players, but at the same time I work with middle and high handicappers, new golfers, so I get to see it all.
Now, I know that you're one of those instructors who embrace technology, and as far as you use different types of technology, which parts of that do you feel are the most beneficial to getting the point across to your students?
Technology is a wonderful addition to any teaching program if you use it to make a better decision on where you're going with the student. In other words, sometimes you can't see what is really happening at impact. So if for example, you have a TrackMan radar, a flight scope, and that helps you see some club delivery information that you might not discern from the video, it can be a useful tool. At the same time, you have to make sure whatever you're using is not complicating the message you're providing your student. It should be something to complement the message and I think simplify it overall. And a lot of times, instead of guessing when you're measuring, you can build a better case with your students. So I think technology, when used correctly, is a great benefit. I think what we got to be careful with as a group of teachers is that sometimes we don't realize that we're overwhelming our students with it. But just like anything else, you learn through trial and error. And when I say that, I've been fortunate enough to use lots of different technology throughout my career. And what I find is that in most cases, it helps me do my job better. And that doesn't mean I don't give lessons without it. There are plenty of times where I'm on the lesson tee, walking the tee, using my eyes, my ears, simply to watch and listen to the ball and make decisions on what I'm going to do with the students. We do a lot of corporate events, and not to say we wouldn't put the students through an evaluation via some of the technology, but a lot of times we have 20 players on the tee, and I have a couple minutes with each, so I'm not going to have the technology there. So, I think it's great to have it, but at the same time, as a teacher, you need to be versed with and without it. You don't want to get a lazy eye or ear teaching golf, and I think technology is a great addition to complement what you do, but don't rely solely on it, because there's still an art to teaching, and there's still plenty of feedback you need to be able to give without it.
Are you using any type of 3D technology down there, Bernie?
What I use currently is TrackMan. I use Swing Catalyst. I have the 3D motion plate, so we see the ground reaction forces that relate to how a player is using the ground. And when I say that, we have a two-dimensional perspective and a three-dimensional perspective. I started out with the 2D plate, which was very helpful, and people really responded well because it's a system where you don't have to put anything on the player. They can simply stand and hit shots, and what happens on the 2D plate, we'll see their center pressure movement, which is essentially how they're applying force on the ground, and it's displayed with what's called a COP trace. And the COP trace is showing the vertical pressure distribution during the swing. So you can look at different places and see how the player is using the ground in their golf swing. And then when you add the 3D plate, then we start to get into vertical force, horizontal force, and we start to look at torque graphs and how a player is using the ground in more detail. And that can be something not only for power, but also injury prevention, because a lot of times what we're seeing is the way the player is interacting with the ground. Sometimes the shoes they wear need to be adjusted to complement what they're doing with their pressure, and or perhaps their spine motion and other factors. So the 3D gives me a much more detailed view of what influences their motion patterns and how efficient they are from the ground up. I prefer that form of three-dimensional analysis to putting on sensors. Not to say I wouldn't love to have a gear system. I had a K-Vest for a number of years that I used, but I'll be honest with you, I really haven't used it much since putting my Swing Catalyst in, because I feel I can get a lot more done in less time with the Swing Catalyst. I think K-Vest is a wonderful product. It just doesn't quite fit the timeline I'm using right now, but there are some cases where it'd be great. And I think there's some other programs and hardware out there that are really good. Sam Putt Lab I use for putting, and if you want to see a three-dimensional view of the stroke, that's a great piece. Their software is excellent, and I know there's some other technologies in the works that we're all waiting to see come out. The big thing, whenever you put sensors on somebody, you have to be careful how much they might be moving shot to shot, which is another reason why I really like the pressure plates, because we're not in that scenario where we got to continually recalibrate. But those other products are excellent if you can manage the calibration and if your student has the patience to go through the calibration and setup time.
Sure. I know that I use Swing Guru, which is a markerless 3D. Not sure what happened there.
Somebody beeped through. I apologize.
There you go. That's okay. So I use Swing Guru, which is, you were talking about markerless. I feel the same way. Worrying about the calibration factors and things like that continuously. Whereas with something like that, it's a 3D camera that basically sees that, and you don't have to worry about those things. So you mentioned vertical force and torque. So there's a lot of our listeners out there who don't know the difference of what really those are. And since you work with that a lot, could you You're a busy guy, Bern.
I apologize.
Maybe we should have done this on your computer.
Do not disturb should work now.
That's okay. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Don't apologize for being in high demand. That's a great thing, actually. So let's get back to what we were talking about. So if we're talking about essentially torque versus vertical, or one or the other. Could you explain that to our listeners, and so that they have a better understanding of that, since you're someone who is using this type of a system on a regular basis?
Well, to answer your question, torque is occurring all the time whenever you move. So, it's not like you don't generate torque. But what you want to keep in mind in a golf swing is when you change directions, how efficient you're using the ground. And when we look at a swing generated by a player using 3D motion analysis from the ground up, we're looking at when they transition, typically in the downswing, if you're a right-handed golfer, when your left arm is parallel to the ground, or what a lot of people would call P5. So left arm's about just above the chest line. If we see where that marker is on the rotational force graph that we have on Swing Catalyst, typically the longer the hitter, the greater the spike is there. And that spike, much like in 3D, when you look at graphs and you see the kinetic chain, but this particular graph is showing how much torque the player is building up to that point. So typically, the amount of torque that you're generating at that point has everything to do with your body resisting, we'll say, counterclockwise rotation. So if we call the backswing once the player gets going, and typically what I see with the better golfers, they actually rotate a little bit counterclockwise to start their swing, meaning they're actually pressuring to the left to start their swing. You can see Jordan Spieth doing it and a lot of great players. And it was very commonplace for many years until I think people became more static over the ball, trying to resist their lower body. But if you go back in time, Bobby Jones, Ben Hogan, Sam Snead, there was a very decided forward motion to start the swing. So when a right-handed golfer begins the swing, their body's actually rotating into the target direction, which we'll call counterclockwise. And it will do that just for a little blip of time. And there's a rebound effect. As you pressure left, you'll shift the pressure to the right. And the same thing occurs in the transition. We actually have, a lot of golfers, they get left way too early, or they lose that torquing action I'm describing. So great players in transition are pushing very hard to the right of their target to actually apply their pressure forward and rotate through the ball. So it's a very dynamic movement, but the best way to put it, you do need to push into the ground hard, and we're able to measure how efficient you are at that point relative to your body mass. And then there are different factors going on because we have the rotary component, the vertical component, and the horizontal component. So in terms of what we're talking about, just imagine if you're back somewhere near the top of a traditional backswing where people are saying you're near the top. Mm-hmm. Okay, the club's reaching the end of the backswing. while that's happening, if you see what's going on the ground, there's a lot of force being applied rightward and leftward. It's like a tug of war. And all of a sudden, eventually there's a rebound effect that creates that peak and complete change from being clockwise to counterclockwise. But there's always a tug of war going on, and that tug of war creates the torquing action that we're talking about. And some players generate more than others, and we see a lot more on the long hitters. So if you take J.B. Holmes and look at his graph and you compare it to Zach Johnson, it's not that Zach has a bad graph or doesn't hit the ball far, but it's going to look very different. And you'll see players that, depending on the shoes they're wearing, we can affect how well they're using the ground. I know in my case, I found something very interesting with different shoe types, and I'm going to be doing a little project here soon with that. But I think it's an exciting time in golf because we can measure some things that you might have seen with your eyes, but you weren't really sure exactly how to quantify or say what was going on. But the bottom line is, the better you're using the ground, the rest of what you're doing starts to work, in my opinion, a lot better. And interestingly enough, great players have been doing it for years. So it's not like suddenly we discovered a new way to start the swing. You know, Bobby Jones did it back in the 20s. Ben Hogan did it throughout his career. Sam Snead, Gary Player. I think what happened is when people got very position-oriented in the golf swing, it was, okay, set up here, go to here, go to here, go to here, and we lost that dynamic fluid motion in the swing. So when you look at rotational force, it happens right. It's really a torque graph, but in our program, it's called rotational force. So when we see the peak, it's right in the downswing, typically left arm, shoulder high to chest high, depending on the player, how dynamic they are. And then when we see the peak vertical force, we're going to see that typically when the hands are approaching hip high. It's going to be a little different on some players, but we're seeing how much of their mass, if let's say, for example, from a vertical standpoint, how much they're applying into the ground and where it's occurring, so the timing of it. So if you weigh, let's say you weigh 100 pounds, just to make life easy on the numbers, if you're using 148% of that or 160% of that, that's another measurement that helps us see how well you're applying your force during the swing. And from a timing perspective, let's say you're playing really well and we see where that is compared to maybe when you're not, it's a nice reference point.
Sure. So, I mean, this is a great way for them to find their tempo, to find where they're creating the most vertical force in the downswing, which is going to translate into a lot more power because you're using the ground as power, as a springboard.
That is absolutely correct. Yeah. I mean, it's, a lot of what we're talking about comes from the game requiring distance. I mean, it's everybody. I haven't met anybody that says they hit the ball too far.
Oh, yeah, no, me either.
We did have one member at the club I used to work at that did come in one time and said, I got a problem. I'm hitting it too far. But I think he was kidding around with me because he kept hitting it over greens. But rarely does somebody come in and say, I'm satisfied with how far I'm hitting it. So we as instructors, coaches, if we can have tools to help us get our students to generate and transfer power with greater efficiency, we're going to help our students.
Sure, absolutely. And I know that right now, too, since there's these type of technology that's given us this information, and you did mention that this is nothing new. I mean, this is something that people have been doing probably since golf has began, but the opportunity to be able to fine-tune it through technology and greater understand it is really making a lot of players be able to hit it a lot further for the average player, and then for those high-level players be able to get the timing of that a little bit better too, so that they're a little bit more consistent in what their ball flight is and things like that. How much do you believe with the ground forces and what happens in ground force can control ball flight?
Well, I think ball flight control, ball control in golf comes back to hitting it, first of all, solid. If you're mishitting the golf ball, we got problems. Anytime you don't make solid contact, all of a sudden gear effect kicks in, and suddenly you might be hitting hooks or weak fades or shots that aren't repetitive. So going back to a general thing, anybody hitting a golf ball in front of me, even though I might have all this technology I'm telling you about, I'm listening to impact point. So I want to know if it's solid or not immediately. And that's not too difficult. We all know what a solid shot sounds like, but discerning between solid and maybe a little bit in the heel or a little bit on the toe, thin. Obviously, if somebody's chunking it or catching it fat, it's going to sound different. But I want to know with a series of shots what this player's tendency is. And typically that's going to show up. That isn't going to show up on the ground reaction force side of things because it's not measuring that. But if you have your TrackMan on, if you really wanted to get down to it, or a Foresight with HMT, you could really narrow it down some more. So I run the TrackMan, but I'll be honest with you, most of my ball flight analysis I prefer to do in the field because I want to see ground contact on turf. I want to hear it. I want to watch the ball fly. I'm going to have players hit at different targets because hitting straight ahead, which we typically do when we're measuring, is part of the analysis, but I like to see the other side of it. And I think that, there are correlations, obviously, when people are synchronizing their swing at a higher level, chances are their ball striking gets better. But there are a lot of elements to controlling the ball that, don't necessarily go with the power side. So there's a balance of, figuring out how to get everything you have into the ball to then creating a consistent, repetitive, and correct impact. Jim Hardy's a dear friend of mine and mentor, and I've had the good fortune of spending a lot of time with Jim, and he's obviously one of the best we have in the business, and he spent a ton of time with John Jacobs. And John Jacobs obviously has influenced many, many teachers.
Yes.
And the mark of, I think, somebody really understands ball flight is being able to detect through sound and being able to see the ball fly more so than hooking up a TrackMan, more so than using a swing catalyst. I mean, don't get me wrong. The technologies we have are great because they measure things. They leave a record. So if I have somebody hit 30 shots on a TrackMan, I can see where the balls landed, what the shots were. And we can look at that data, and typically you can tell when somebody's hit the ball on the toe on a TrackMan or the heel because the spin axis on the ball isn't going to match up. But I think it's every bit as important to do that without the technology, and I think it's really critical to make sure that in our quest for power, sometimes we don't put the player where they might be creating an unstable impact environment. When I say that, if you're trying to get maximum vertical force, let's say, you might be delivering the club in a plane that doesn't create the ball flight you want. So is that beneficial? Probably not if you need to control the ball. Does it matter if you're a short hitter? Probably not. It kind of depends on the student. I think there are a lot of players where distance is the most important priority. I'd say, if we take most country club players, most, intermediate players, you got to go for distance. But as players have enough distance for the level they're trying to play at, now it's control the ball. What can we do to get their ball flight where under stress they can control it better?
Sure, no, absolutely, and I think that that little pearl of wisdom that you just said, under stress, is really where it matters, because that's where players can either break down or end up rising to the occasion. Some players actually play better when they're under stress. Because it kind of fuels them to get a little bit more focused because there's something on the line. It might be a $5 Nassau, it might be a club championship, it might be a tournament that they're in, it might be their normal foursome and they're just betting for a beer. So those things are definitely that stress factor definitely makes a huge difference in whether a player can perform under that, and then if there's internal stress too, and what they're just causing to themselves, because there's so many players who put themselves under stress when it's really not that important, or because it's just a game. But some players just in their normal, their normal rounds will put themselves under stress. So if they can kind of understand when they are putting themselves under stress, is there any time that you simulate stress, Bern, with your students, or try to simulate stress during a session that you're doing with them?
Absolutely. And I do that a number of ways. A lot of times you can, I have a practice facility that I can create on-course situations. And when I say that, we have formally 3 practice holes, which are learning centers on. So I can create different angles, and I like to set up little game scenarios where I'll give a point system to the student. I'll take a given target, and let's just say their miss pattern is left of target. And I'll say to them, all right, I'm going to give you a zone I want you to hit your shot into. And that zone, let's say, is between the pin and 30 feet to the right on a 7-iron. And I'll say, if you hit the ball in the zone, I'm going to give you a point, as long as it finishes between the pin and the area I mark 30 feet to the right. Now, let's say that they miss the green to the right. As long as it's a solid shot, I'm not going to take any points away. But I will say to them, if you hit the ball left of the pin, you lose 5 points. And I'll say to them, you need to get to 10 points, and you have 15 minutes. So in other words, they're practicing with a very specific target area, and we might change the angle while they're doing it. So they might be hitting straight ahead to this green, or we might move them to the left side of the tee where they're going into the target area from there, or from the right side. So indirectly, I'm also teaching them on the tee where they tend to flight the ball better from. Because some players, they just end up walking into the tee area in the same place. And, a lot of times if you play better from the left side, probably not a bad idea to learn to do that too. If you can, in an ideal scenario, try to drive the ball into the fairway where you give yourself angles that set you up for success. And then understand when you have a certain position out there, this isn't my specialty, so let me create a target area that gets me by here. Obviously we'd like to hit perfect shots all the time, but that's not going to happen. So helping people understand their patterns, some of it is through creating stress through games, and or take them on the golf course, give them performance goals. But it's all relative to the player. What I just described is for a low handicap player, somebody that's trying to get to 0. And then, tour player, mini tour caliber, anybody who's a +4 or higher handicap, then we might make that zone smaller. And then we might shift the zone on either side. But what I like to do is help people get more, we'll say, accustomed to practicing under stress. That way when they play, it's not a big deal. If you're just practicing where you're hitting straight ahead all the time, it's not bad. But the more random we can make it, and the more variety we can give you with different games and so forth that are short and sweet, I think you get a lot more out of it.
I know that with my students, I try to get them a lot of times to have a buddy to practice with, and then to kind of like say, all right, you call a shot, and then see if you can hit the shot, and whoever hits the shot gets to call the next shot. And then that way they're working on trying to hit different shots, trying to hit fades, draws, hooks, cuts, whatever they need to do, trying to hit specific targets, and then giving themselves points for when they do that. Who called the most shots in your practice round? And then that way they're doing it against basically not as much themselves as another player, but they're kind of doing it against themselves too, because they're trying to rise to the occasion to pull off a shot that they need to do. So then when they're on the golf course and they see a shot that they have to hit, but it's not a normal shot, at least they, or should I say it's not their normal shot pattern, then at least they have that opportunity that they know that they've tried to work on these shots and put themselves in that situation. So now they can kind of act on it. And when someone else is like a buddy is doing it, they're always going to be hard on you. They're never going to be easy on you. So and when players get out there, I think they're more hard on themselves when they're actually playing. So I've found that's a good way. But I like the way that you're saying, where they can maybe, if they have a miss and their miss is always a pull, then they should always be trying to hit it to the right of their target. That'll help them kind of get over that miss, or kind of work around how to what their natural tendencies are, and maybe start to change those tendencies so they have a little bit more control over what they do.
Absolutely.
So we're kind of getting to the end of our time here. This really flew by. This was a very fast episode for me. So for some players who are in that area, or players who want to come in, or just actually just maybe pick your brain a little bit and get in touch with you, what is the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you?
The easy way would be, you can visit my website, which is BernieNajar.com, or you can send me a note via Twitter, Facebook. My Twitter handle's at Bernie Najar Golf, and you can also find that on Facebook. And my mobile number, 410-336-4979, is another way to get me. I'll be honest, during the day I don't usually get to the phone too often, because in lessons I don't answer calls, but if you want to send me a text message, happy to respond when I have a moment. But I think overall, the world, we're so connected via the internet. So if you Google me, you'll find those links. And I have to confess, I'm not the best Facebooker, but I'm working on it. And I'll be posting some videos soon. I was just down at the Masters, filmed a lot of the field. I go every year. Got some nice footage I'm going to share with folks. So also have a YouTube channel. And again, some of the video posts will be on there. And if you're curious about the recent Golf Magazine article, it's in the issue with Adam Scott on the cover, which actually talks about the ramp-up drill. And that drill is something that plays into increasing that torque graph number that you would get. So if you're interested in trying that, that's something you can look into at golf.com. If you put my name in the search engine, you'll see two videos. There's one on there on fixing a slice, and the ramp-up drill to increase this torque that we talked about earlier in the transition. So I think that would be an easy way to get going if you want to see more on what I'm up to. And certainly, if any of you are interested in learning aim point, I've been a certified instructor now for a number of years, and we'll be having some clinics throughout the season.
Great. Well, Bernie, I know you're real busy. I know you got to run, but thank you very much for being with us, and continued success. And as we always say here on Breaking Par, until we meet again, try to keep it in the short grass.
Thanks, Bernard. Great being with you. And to all the listeners, best of luck with your game.
Thanks, Bern. Take care.
You're welcome. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.